All right, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'm Samantha Quinn. I'm the program director at Pacific Ocean Energy Trust, and hopefully you are all here for the TEAMER How to Write a Successful Application webinar. I just wanted to say a few housekeeping notes. So this is being recorded just as an FYI and will be available on our website within the next day or two. And then just as a reminder, if you are planning to submit for RFTS 13, that is due June 28th. And then I'm also going to plug the OREC conference that Pacific Ocean Energy Trust puts on every year, and that is happening the week of May 20th. We're partnering with the Marine Energy Collegiate Competition. They're starting on the 20th, and then OREC starts officially on the 21st. And I believe Brian is going to take questions throughout. And if we can't get to all questions, we can follow up later. But Brian, I guess, how do you want for people to?
Well, so I guess the Q&A option in Zoom's one. Are participants able to put their hands up if they have a question? And can we unmute them?
Aaron?
Yes, we can allow participants to speak.
Okay.
And I believe they can raise their hands as well.
Cool. So we'll monitor, I guess, like all forms of Q&A. So either put your hand up and we can unmute you, or feel free to write it in the chat or the Q&A box, and we can get those answered one way or another. So I am now handing it over to Dr. Brian Polagye.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So I'm going to start sharing a screen here, which hopefully comes through in a second. Basically, as Sam said, I'm Dr. Brian Polagye. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Washington. I am also a member of the TEAMER technical board, and I've both reviewed and been a team lead for a pretty wide range of applications. And the motivation for this was about 6 months ago, we started to see we had enough applications come through that we were starting to be able to kind of draw lines between, where applications struggled and where they really succeeded. And so we thought it would be helpful to put together a webinar to go through some of what we saw as kind of common mistakes in the application process, and a way to potentially allow applicants to get through the application process on the first try rather than resubmission. So the objectives for the webinar today are going to be to understand the parts of the application and the criteria weights. That's going to be a pretty brief part of this. How to avoid some common mistakes that we've observed over the last several RFTS cycles, and some advice about how to use reviewer feedback to strengthen reapplications. I've got a number of pictures in here that were helpfully provided by Poet to provide a little bit of context to what's going on in the TEAMER network. When you see pictures on a slide that has an issue, it doesn't mean that facility is an issue. It's just a nice picture of that facility. So, and as Sam said, I'm happy to take questions as we go. So I'll pause intermittently as we go through the various sections. Happy to have a dialogue about this. If we start having kind of too long a dialogue, I'll maybe push things out to the discussion time that we have at the end. So with that, I'll get into the first bit on application sections and criteria weights. So a reminder, the application sections and the criteria weights are up on the TEAMER website. You can see exactly how the scoring criteria are applied. What you're looking at here is scoring criteria that are a little bit more condensed. So I've taken a couple of categories and basically put them together. And the two things I really want to draw attention to are the categories that have the most importance. So the technical approach is weighted at 41% of the total score. That's the 3-page document that describes the general approach you're taking, why you're taking it, how you're going to analyze the data, what sort of metrics you're going to want to use. That's almost half the total criteria weight. So if you're thinking about where to put a lot of emphasis on your application, that's a great place to put it. The other is the facility's description and selection rationale accounts for the next highest fraction of the total score. And so when you're thinking about trying to, again, where to put emphasis, making sure that the facility description is clear, that it's aligned with the objectives, and that the reason for choosing the facility is clearly described, that'll really benefit you in your application. So there's a lot of different things that go into the application, but technical approach and the facility information, those are the ones that have the highest score. We've made suggestions about who should write each section, and in honesty, most sections of the application could probably be completed either by the applicant or the facility. The recommendations are just given based on technical board expectations about who we thought would be best positioned to write each section, but you should really do what makes sense for your specific application. If it makes sense for the applicant to write some of what are notionally the facility sections or vice versa, do what makes sense. Just make sure the application speaks with one voice and it doesn't look like kind of a mishmash of what a facility wanted to say and what an applicant wanted to say. And so you really want to make sure you're on the same page about your objectives and approach in the application. A couple of questions we've had about why we do things certain ways, and it seems like maybe it's a suboptimal approach. So one is, well, why is the application split between the submittable boxes and PDF uploads? And the reason is we're trying to balance two competing priorities. One is POET needs to be able to aggregate information about applications in responses to requests from the Water Power Technology Office. And so with the submittable entries, they can just aggregate things together really quickly and provide information feedback to WPTO really quickly. So that favors a submittable text entry. But every project's different, and the technical board really wanted to give applicants flexibility to describe the projects and the technical approach in a way that really made sense to the applicants and facility, and that really favors a PDF upload, which is why we end up with this mix of kind of two different ways of, two different types of documents that need to be uploaded as part of the application. The other question we see pretty often is why applicants can't upload other supporting documents or videos. I think part of the reason we get asked this question is because this was possible in earlier versions of the application, but we wanted to try to standardize the amount of information that's provided to reviewers and really kind of make the review load relatively uniform, rather than having some applications with multiple supporting documents that reviewers are trying to go through and evaluate and some that didn't. So this is just trying to balance things. Any other kind of questions about the application process, things you've wondered about but never had the opportunity to ask? All right, well, if you come up with questions, we can answer them at the end. In terms of who reviews the applications, it's a mix of reviewers each RFTS cycle. So we have staff from national laboratories providing reviews, staff from industry, and then within universities, faculty, postdoc staff, and really senior graduate students can be involved in the review process. Something to realize is all the reviewers do remain anonymous. They're all subject to non-disclosure agreements, and they're all being paid for their time to conduct the reviews. Okay, that's everything I have on applications. Let's move on into issues. And I'll note that I can't see raised hands, so hopefully Sam and Devin and Aaron are monitoring that.
Yeah, nothing so far.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so the first one may seem relatively obvious, and that's violations of TEAMER rules. So this is some of the rules that are laid out on the TEAMER website, as well as things that maybe an application fails a compliance check and so gets declined. So this would be, for example, an application that's totally unrelated to marine energy. So the examples of TEAMER rules that we've seen violated that make it through the compliance checks, but then are still running afoul of the rules and get declined, are cases where facilities propose to purchase equipment. That's not allowed explicitly by the TEAMER rules. Supplies are fine, and I think TEAMER is working on a clarification of the difference between supplies and equipment, but it's largely a dollar amount issue for a single item. Another example of rules violations we've run into a couple times are when the facility budget includes a subcontract to the applicant. And applicant funding is provided in a limited way under TEAMER, but it's just for travel support and for test article shipment. It can't be for the applicant to conduct analysis or conduct the testing. The majority of the funding goes to the facility. The other issue we've seen is facility budgets including a major subcontract to another facility that's not part of the network. And so basically for funding to flow out through TEAMER, facilities need to be part of the network and need to go through that application process. The other thing we've seen in a few cases is cases where the application proposes to hold all the results in confidence in perpetuity. It is allowable to restrict the release for up to 5 years, but at that point, the information developed through the TEAMER process does need to be publicly released. So if we find applications that have reviewed well, but then during the technical board discussion or subsequent evaluation we find are violating the rules, these get declined and they're encouraged to revise and resubmit. And I think in almost all the cases we've had applications that did violate the rules, the resubmissions scored really well and went through on the next round. So this is just more of a note of how to get through again on the first time rather than the second time. And there's a link to all of the TEAMER rules and regulations at the bottom of the page there. Second issue we've seen is applications that are not a clear next step in the process. And so I'll give 3 examples of cases that we've seen recurrently. One is proposing to conduct high fidelity computationally intensive CFD when there hasn't been any sort of prior analysis or a low fidelity simulation. A second is performing tank and basin testing prior to, without any prior analysis or having conducted low fidelity simulation. And a third is going to open water testing as a very first step in the development process. Now, typically when we see these sort of applications that aren't necessarily a clear next step, the feedback from the reviewers and the technical board will often recommend a more appropriate step to take. That being said, we may not have full knowledge of why you're necessarily proposing a given step that you are. And so if the step that's proposed doesn't make sense, it's entirely allowable to push back with justification in the reapplication. It just needs to make a stronger case for why a non-traditional approach is most suitable for this particular case. And that may absolutely be the case in a number of cases. I feel like I use the word case a lot too much there. Okay, so second issue, things not being a clear next step. The third issue that we've seen pretty frequently is inconsistent roles. So this will be a case where the applicant and facility have overlapping roles and there's not a clear lead. This raises concerns that when the project actually starts, it may be a bit of a tug of war between the facility and the applicant in terms of executing the work. We've also seen cases where you'll end up with a key element of project scope where it's like a central objective to the project, but neither the applicant nor the facility seem to have responsibility for it. And so it's a little unclear exactly how that objective is going to be met. And then the third issue we've seen is cases where the applicant and facility roles basically switch between different sections of the application. So maybe the applicant is listed as having one role in the technical approach, but in the roles section, the applicant has a different approach, or the facility has that approach. So trying to be consistent within the application and making sure that all of the things that you want to get done are actually covered by either the applicant or the facility role. Another issue we've seen is applications that are not really writing to the review criteria. So when you submit your applications through Submittable, what the reviewers see on the other end is that application, and it's lined up with a second panel that has basically review criteria that have one question per section of the application. So the review criteria, again, are on the website. You can see what questions the reviewers are being asked to evaluate for each of those sections. And so because that alignment exists, having information that addresses specific review criteria, but scattering in different areas of the application can make it hard for the reviewers to keep track of this. So in some cases, an application might be responsive, but the responsive information might be in such a way that the reviewer actually doesn't even realize it's there. So trying to basically write to the review criteria and put your information in the sections of the application that are relevant is really helpful. The other issue we've seen is sometimes there's an expectation that the reviewers are going to be able to infer the intent or motivation. And so that can be a case where you have, say, a facility or an applicant is generally well known in the sector and has a number of acknowledged strengths, but those strengths don't go into the application. And then maybe a reviewer is not as familiar as they might otherwise be with the applicant or facility strengths, and so is trying to guess at those strengths when they review the application. The other is cases where the motivation for the work, we can kind of take guesses about why the work is being motivated, but there's not a real clear statement for it, where say like it looks like it's just duplicative with prior work, and we can guess that, well, maybe an applicant has gone through some sort of a change in their design process, and so even though something like this has been done before, it needs to be done again. So just being really clear about that motivation and not leaving it open to the reviewers trying to really infer it from incomplete information is really helpful to getting the applications through on the first pass. The fifth issue we've seen is an appearance of limited applicant benefit. So we want to emphasize that it's important to demonstrate in the application that the applicant has a clear benefit from the proposed work, not just that the facility wants to do the work and the applicant is, say, supportive of the work or sees merit to it. So really, these applications often read as primarily benefiting the facility, where it's like the facility really wants to do something and the applicant thinks it's worthwhile, but it's not clear how the applicant would use it. So this would be cases like a facility wants to demonstrate a new capability or expand a different one and needs the funding to do this. And the applicant might at some point in the future make use of that capability, but it's not clear how the applicant would directly benefit from it. So to help with that, we've recently had an adjustment to the review criteria to make it clear that when we talk about benefit, we're really talking about applicant benefits. So we want to make sure that applications do really benefit the applicant and not primarily the facility. The sixth issue is cases where we see a poor match to the facility. So this might be a case where the technical approach is generally pretty reasonable and appropriate for the type of testing that's going to be done, but the test article size is mismatched to the facility. Generally, we see this as a facility being too small to actually meet the objectives of the test. I don't think we've ever seen a case where a facility was too large relative to the test article. The other issue we've seen with facility matches is cases where you can have a core part of the application, but the facility isn't listed as having any expertise in some key area of the technical approach. So maybe it's a kind of a two-part project that involves two different aspects of testing, and the facility demonstrates in their roles and background that they have a lot of experience in one of those areas, but then don't talk about the other at all. So make sure that making it clear, again, why the facility is the right choice for the project, because that is a pretty significant aspect of the review criteria. Now, the feedback from reviewers and technical board in these cases, when you see a poor facility match, they may include a facility recommendation in the revised application. Again, just like recommendations about what constitutes a next step, it may be that the facility that was originally proposed really is the right choice. It just needed to be clarified. And so again, pushing back on that recommendation and making it clear why the facility really is the right choice, that's really helpful in a resubmission. Also note that the facility is the website's going through an update that's going to have improved facility capability filters. So you'll be able to search for facilities a little bit more easily than it's been possible in the past. The seventh issue we've seen are cases where key aspects of the proposal are vague. So the two types we generally have seen are cases where there's insufficient information to conclude that a test article actually exists. So someone says they want to go test something, but it's not clear they've actually built the thing they want to test. And so the proposal can give the appearance of testing vaporware. So making it clear that if you have a test article, or if you don't have a test article, what its status is probably more useful than just trying to be vague on it and seeing whether it'll slide through review. The other are cases where the applicant has experimental or simulation data that could be really impactful for the proposed work. So helping to validate a model or setting up the sort of tank testing or field testing that needs to be done, but there's not sufficient detail provided to allow reviewers to draw conclusions about the value of that information. So really the best practice is be as clear as possible about the key aspects and the strengths of the application. About to move out of issues. These are kind of the 7 kind of core issues that we've seen over a series of applications. There's not, there's others that we've seen kind of on a one-off basis, but this was kind of my best distillation of everything we've seen and seen several times. Okay, so you've applied, you got an application that was declined, you received a number of comments back. On resubmissions, if the reviewer comments indicate minor flaws, address these and resubmit. Don't heavily rescope the approach and facility. So we've seen cases where applications had kind of seemed like a pretty minor point and then came back in with a totally different scope, totally different facility. And it's basically a whole new application, not so much a resubmission. when it comes to resubmissions, we have a pretty mixed acceptance rate on resubmissions. Sometimes when they get resubmitted, they're an absolute slam dunk. They score really well. All the flaws have been addressed and things are really good to go, and they move directly onto the test plan, and that goes pretty smoothly as well. Sometimes when reviewers ask for additional detail, the additional details that are provided can reveal flaws in the approach, and the resubmission can actually score more poorly. So this gets back to the try to be as clear as you can up front about key aspects of the work, because otherwise, if you resubmit and clarify something, it may actually be a third round before you actually can get through the overall application process and move on to test plan development. And we'll note that generally the resubmissions have the same reviewers as the initial proposal. So if you resubmit and don't make changes, first of all, you're probably going back to the same review pool or a very similar review pool that you had the first time. And those reviewers, even if they're new reviewers, are going to have access to the previous comments about what needed to change. So, when you get feedback, we try to make it as actionable as possible. And we really do appreciate it when you can take those feedback pieces into account and adjust an application to make it more successful the second time. And finally, speaking of feedback, the poet and the technical board really want the TEAMER process to work for facilities applicants and reviewers. We're really invested in continuous improvements to the process. Back at RFTS 7, we made a major change to the application process to address some of the concerns reviewers had about not having enough information to really accurately review applications. We've made adjustments to the review criteria to align them with the application content, and we have some new procedures for closing the loop with reviewers to help calibrate them against technical board expectations. So all reviewers seeing the review comments from all the other reviewers and the overall presentation and technical board feedback. So on that note, feedback is absolutely appreciated on the TEAMER process. We can't always act on the feedback we receive, but if we can't act on it, we do often try to explain why. So that's everything I had to say, and happy to take broader questions on the topics in the presentation, or if you have broader questions about Poet, I'm sure Sam would be happy to jump in as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian. So yeah, anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat or the Q&A box.
Got a hand up?
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
So how does one go about deciding on picking a TEAMER site? So I have a technology and I don't know what's the next step. Where do I go? How do I tested it in my swimming pool, it works. Now what? How do I get a TEAMER site involved in experimenting with it?
Sam, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
So I can take it, that's fine. So our website has a list of all of our facilities that are currently in the network. So I guess it would depend on what step you want to take next. If you want to do numerical modeling or some kind of modeling, we have a lot. A majority of our facilities have modeling capabilities, I would say. But yeah, I would say start with the TEAMER website, the different facility drop downs. And then if you need more help finding a facility that would fit for you and what you're trying to achieve, then you can always send us an email and we can try to help match you.
And I'll mention that the facility drop downs and filters right now are pretty coarse. It can take a bit of hunting to find a facility. We've recently gone through and recategorized most of the facilities in the network to try to clarify exactly what those capabilities are, to make it a little bit easier for an applicant to filter, what sort of testing support they're looking for help with.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? Gail asked that if we're going to be sending out a copy of the slides, we will have the slides available on our website. This is being recorded. So we'll have the recording on the website either later today or sometime tomorrow.
Solomon, I'll answer your question that was in the Q&A about, so has anyone received open water support? If so, did they have smaller versions tested in a tank first? We've had most of the open water support to date has been more for deployment of instrumentation around systems being tested at sea, not necessarily ones that have had previous tank, not necessarily like basically. I'll restart. Basically, a lot of the open water applications to date have been either resource characterization or instrumentation deployments around devices that are under test, as opposed to direct support for device deployment. We do have one project right now that I believe is moving in that direction, and that did have a smaller tank test, as well as some numerical simulation and some dry testing before going into the field.
So Thomas asked, is 13 the end of the program? And we are happy to say that no, it is not the end of the program. We don't know how much longer the program will run, but it should be a minimum of another 2 years. So happy to say that we will be continuing the program. Gail, did you have another question?
Yes. Am I off mute?
Yes,
You are.
Okay, thank you. I was just writing it in the chat. I'll finish the chat.
Okay.
Okay, I work for Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in Alaska. We are very interested in contacting companies who may want to test their devices, their MHK devices in Cook Inlet. There are several reasons for this, and one is if any company can get a device to work in Cook Inlet with their high tides and the silt, you can make those devices work anywhere. It's a very harsh environment. So yeah, so we're looking for companies who may be interested in deploying some devices in Cook Inlet.
Great. I guess a question for you would be, do you have a specific site and do you hold permits for the site?
We do not hold permits for the site yet. It is something we are working on.
Great.
The first site is off Anchor Point, Kenai Peninsula. So I just put that in the chat.
Great. I would say let's talk offline. If you can send me a chat in here with your email address, and then we can talk about how we could get you to be part of the TEAMER network in the future, potentially.
Okay, that'd be great. I just put it in the Q&A.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
It says I must be doing something wrong. On my screen it says chat is disabled.
Oh, weird. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Sam, there's another question from Solomon, a follow-up about funding the construction of test devices through TEAMER. And I can start the answer to that question, but maybe you can apply a little bit more information there. So Solomon, in general, TEAMER doesn't support device fabrication. That being said, if there's like an aspect of a device you're trying to test and a facility, say, needs to build, part of the interface for that device, that would be allowable. Sam, do you have any other clarifications you want to add there?
Part of the reason that we cannot, this is just for awareness, is that part of the reason that we cannot provide funding for construction or manufacturing of any devices is due to some of the federal regulations that basically prohibit us for providing funding for that. So it's not that we don't want to, but it's something that we basically cannot fund at this point. So it's something we've been talking to the Department of Energy about, but from what we've heard from our contracting officer, it is unlikely that TEAMER will ever be able to provide funding for construction, manufacturing of devices.
Sherlyn, you had your hand up earlier, but took it down. Did your question get answered, or did you have yeah?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Brian, I think your slides, really helpful for us when preparing the test plan. I just wanted to ask about the slide deck, and Sam said it will be uploaded on the website. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sam, could you unmute Haig?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes, it's now unmuted.
Hi, Brian. My question is kind of going back to the open water testing. So if we have a technology and we want to see the feasibility of using the technology in a certain area, we would be able to use the TEAMER grant to do some of that preliminary site assessments. Okay, cool. I was just a little.
Yeah, you could imagine, say, looking at a facility in the open water network that has capabilities for site assessment, so wave measurement or current assessment. I don't know the specifics of your technology, but an open water request to go in and do detailed site characterization is totally fair game for an open water request.
Okay, thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Gail, did you have another question? Or did I just not put your hand down? Okay. Any other questions?
I think we answered everything in the Q&A list.
Yeah.
Everyone maybe wants to get back to the eclipse.
Yeah. If you do have any questions, feel free to, excuse me, to contact us. I will put our email in the chat. So yeah, if you do have any questions about this or anything else with regard to TEAMER, we are always here and able to answer questions. So Brian, thanks very much. Oh, we may have another question. Raymond?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, coming through fine.
I have a question. Is there any opportunity for sort of someone to take a preliminary look at a proposal before, so we don't have to wait? Like if we're not missing, one of the points or maybe a little bit off, we might be able to get some preliminary feedback so that we don't have to wait till the end and then wait another, till the next round.
I don't think we currently have a mechanism for that, Sam, but I mean, there could be some sort of like an office hour mechanism that we do.
So I'm sorry, I was reading another, the other Q&A. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, it was a question about whether TEAMER has any capabilities for team leads or tech board members to be able to look at applications as they're being drafted and to provide preliminary feedback, as opposed to just waiting until the application is submitted and then getting the full round of feedback.
Yeah, I guess you're right, correct in that we don't have anything set up right now. I think that would have to be something that we discuss internally to see if we wanted to allow something like that.
Yeah, I think if there was sufficient demand, we'd consider mechanisms to do it. So I guess if I'll say a vote of one at least for that. But if others think that would be helpful, please, send the TEAMER email or a message and let us know.
Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Well, with that, Brian, thank you. And yes, if you have other questions after this, feel free to email us at teamer@pacificoceanenergy.org. And we can either help you by email or we can set up a call.
Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks. Bye.